Welcome to Reddit Affairs, the place where secrets are revealed and hearts are broken. Sit back, relax, and let this story take you on an emotional ride. And remember, if you love deep, dramatic stories, don't forget to subscribe and support the channel. I've been married to my wife, Emily, for 10 years. 10 damn years. A decade of shared laughter, Sunday morning coffee, anniversaries, inside jokes, and the quiet kind of comfort that only time can build. I thought I knew her better than anyone. I thought she knew me too. But I guess I was just a fool who believed that love could outlast temptation. We met in college. I was 22. She was 20. She had that kind of energy that pulled everyone in. Bright eyes, quick smile, soft voice that could turn a boring day into something worth remembering. I wasn't the guy girls usually noticed, but for some reason, she did. We clicked fast. Within 2 years, we were living together. Within 4, we were married. Our marriage wasn't perfect. Whose is? But it was stable. She worked as a graphic designer, and I ran a small construction business. We had a modest house, 2 cars, and a routine that felt safe. Predictable, maybe, but I like predictable. Predictable meant trustworthy. Then, about a year ago, things started to feel off. Emily became distant. Not the usual work stress, kind of distant. It was something deeper, colder. She'd stay late at work more often, barely touch her dinner, and always had her phone face down. When I'd ask if something was wrong, she'd smile that fake, tight-lipped smile and say, "I'm fine, just tired." At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't paying enough attention. Maybe the spark had just died out after 10 years. So I tried. I planned date nights, brought her flowers, even took a few days off work to surprise her with a weekend trip. She seemed to appreciate it, but I could tell her mind was somewhere else. The worst part? My dad, Richard, started coming around more often around that same time. He lived about an hour away, but suddenly he was in the neighborhood every week. I didn't think much of it. He'd always been charming, the kind of man who could walk into any room and make people laugh. My mom died when I was a teenager, and he'd never remarried. Emily got along with him, maybe too well, now that I think about it. I remember one evening vividly. I came home early from work, hoping to surprise Emily with dinner. My dad's car was parked outside. I didn't think anything of it. He'd been helping her with some home projects, she said. When I walked in, they were sitting close on the couch, laughing about something on her phone. When they noticed me, Emily jumped slightly, like she'd been caught doing something wrong. My dad just smirked and said, "Hey, son," just showing Emily some funny videos. That moment stuck with me. I couldn't shake it. Over the next few weeks, little things began to pile up. I'd find his cologne lingering in our living room. Once, I noticed an empty wine bottle, the expensive kind my dad liked, in the trash. Even though I hadn't had any, Emily's mood swings got worse. One night, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed. I told myself I wasn't the type to snoop, but my hands didn't listen. It was a text from a contact named R. Can't stop thinking about last night. My stomach dropped. My mind immediately raced through every possibility. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was a co-worker, a friend, anyone else. But I knew. Deep down, I knew. I scrolled up. "You're incredible. Wish we could be together," without sneaking around. He has no idea, does he? My vision blurred. My chest felt tight. I could hear the water running in the bathroom, and for a moment, I wanted to scream, to break something. But I didn't. I just stood there, frozen, reading message after message, realizing that the 2 people I trusted most in this world were laughing behind my back. When she came out of the shower, wrapped in a towel, smiling at me like nothing was wrong, I couldn't even look at her. I put her phone down and walked outside. The air felt sharp, cold, like the universe itself was mocking me. I didn't confront her that night, or the next. Instead, I pretended everything was fine. I smiled, kissed her cheek, asked about her day, all while my insides burned. I needed proof, solid proof, because when I went to war, I wanted to make sure I destroyed both of them completely. So I waited. I installed cameras. Not hidden ones. I used an old security system we'd never activated, pretending it was for safety. I made sure one faced the living room, one the kitchen, and one the front door. She didn't suspect a thing. A week later, I went out of town for a business trip. I wasn't actually going anywhere. I parked my car near a friend's house, turned on the live feed from my phone, and waited. It took less than 3 hours. At first, I saw Emily pacing around the house, texting. Then, my dad's car pulled up. He let himself in with the spare key I'd stupidly given him years ago. She ran into his arms like some goddamn romance movie. They kissed, passionate, familiar, like they'd done it 100 times before. And I just sat there in my car, watching everything unravel. The woman I loved, the man who raised me, together in a home I built for us. Something inside me broke that day. But in the emptiness that followed, a new feeling took root. Quiet, cold, and razor-sharp. Revenge. After that night in my car, after watching them fall into each other like they were making up for lost time, rage and grief did a strange thing to me. They sharpened into calculation. I could have crashed through the front door, torn them apart, screamed until my throat bled. I could have put my hands on my father, or thrown the photographs I'd taken in their faces, and watched everything burn. Instead, I put the camera feed into a locked folder and closed it like a wound I refused to let bleed where anyone could see. I told myself I needed control. If they were going to steal the rest of my life, I would not let them take it quietly. There's a certain power in quiet, in letting the other side keep their illusion of safety while you design the mechanism that will remove it. So I went back inside the house that night, kissed my wife with the same mechanical tenderness I'd used for years, and let them keep living as if nothing had happened. First, I built a timeline. I read every message again and again until the words looked like a foreign language whose grammar I'd finally decoded. Times, dates, places. Patterns. My dad preferred Sundays. Emily preferred late nights. Their rendezvous had rhythm, because rhythm masks guilt. They become sloppy, confident. Confident people make mistakes. I started small and mundane. I changed nothing obvious. Instead, I used the mundane like a scalpel. I rerouted our grocery deliveries to arrive during hours they'd be together. I booked a contractor to fix the back fence and made sure the contractor would need access the same afternoon my dad would visit. I learned their little lies, the work meetings that lasted an hour too long, the sudden need to check on a friend. I fed those lies back to them later in the form of my unquestioning acceptance. It was important they believed I believed them. I also became an actor. I practiced my face in the mirror until emotionless became natural. I learned to laugh at things I hated, to breathe calmly when my stomach wanted to drop. People underestimate how disarming a calm husband is. If you act like the problem doesn't exist, everyone else assumes you've already solved it or that it never mattered. That assumption was my weapon. At the same time, I built a quiet arsenal of proof. I made copies of messages. I recorded times when my dad would be gone for an hour and Emily would be in the shower. I traced routes and receipts. But I did not use the evidence to confront. Confrontation is messy. It gives the other person an opportunity to cry, to confess, to bargain. I wanted something cleaner. I wanted the slow collapse, the kind where they keep telling themselves the foundations will hold even as the cracks spread. There were practical things to consider, ugly and necessary. Finances. My business was small and tied to my name. My father had access to our accounts for years, the result of my naive trust. Emily knew how to navigate my calendar, my password habits, my friends. I quietly changed passwords, moved money into accounts only I controlled, and tightened the lock on everything that could be used as an escape. Part of revenge is removing exit ramps. I wanted them to kneel on the road they'd paved. The next phase was social. My father was a social animal. He loved being admired. He'd always been the center of attention at family gatherings, the storyteller with the booming laugh. So I weaponized attention. I arranged a family brunch and invited extended family I knew would be curious, the kind who asked too many questions and lingered for too long. I made sure to be charming, to hug my father and ask him in front of everyone about his new hobby, the woodworking project he'd been pretending required weekly visits. He puffed up and told half-truths, proud and loud. Emily laughed on cue. The tragedy of playing roles is that people forget they're acting until the curtain falls. Next, I turned to Emily's work. She loved her independence. The idea that someone could touch her career terrified her more than exposure. I started subtly dropping comments in conversation about how talent is fleeting and how fragile freelance reputations are. I began to be supportive in the exact ways that made her complacent, offering to be her accountability partner for deadlines, volunteering to take a call when she was swamped. It was a live care that kept her head down and hands busy. While she typed and designed and answered clients, I set traps she couldn't see. Traps aren't always explosive. Sometimes they are simply exposure in the right light. So I began to feed small facts into places that would sting later. I didn't plant evidence. I manipulated context. A voicemail left on a wrong machine, a wine glass with lipstick left on the porch where neighbors could spot it, a discreetly forgotten calendar appointment showing up on her work email because I'd synced devices under the pretense of helping her with backups. These were not crimes. They were annoyances that ate away at confidence. They turned certainty into paranoia. And paranoia is a slow killer. It makes people double-check their pleasures. It makes them see ghosts in every hallway. Emily started to flinch. She checked her phone more in front of me, scrolled like it were a forbidden text, and then closed the screen when I entered the room. My father, who had always been bold, began to hesitate when I asked him innocuous questions. He'd smile, but the corners of his grin were crooked, like a man learning to weigh risk. There were nights I slept a few hours and watched the house breathe, the creak of a floorboard, the soft swell of the refrigerator. I imagined them whispering in the dark, and the urge to walk in and end it all gnawed at me. But I kept those urges in. I learned to savor the slow heat of waiting. Revenge, I told myself, was not about fury. Fury is a flare that dies fast. Revenge is a furnace, deep and sustained. I also found a way to twist guilt into a mirror that reflected their worst. My father loved his dignity. He had a reputation in the neighborhood for being a widower who'd raised an only son alone. He'd been the pillar at my school fundraisers, the one people praised for his resilience. Reputation often holds people in place more tightly than law. So I began to let rumor do the work I couldn't. Not by lying, but by letting the truth unfold in small, unavoidable ways. At one point, I invited my father to join me on a business review, a casual lunch where I'd show him how far a construction company had come. He came, flattered, and I let him boast. Then I asked him, in front of a few of my employees, about boundaries. The question was harmless, phrased like a lesson for the younger men. He answered with pride about how family comes first and how he'd always kept his distance when necessary. Later that evening, I made sure a bottle of wine from his recent visit was placed where it would be found by one of my employees who'd also stopped by sometimes. The implications are what people build into them. People draw conclusions in the spaces between facts. As the psychological pressure mounted, emotional cracks widened. Emily snapped at smaller things. She lost her temper over trivial matters. One night, she punched a wall and left a half moon of plaster. Nothing physical between me and her, but the rage was there and it was loud. My father retreated to the den more often, retreating behind small tasks. He started calling me at odd hours to check in, and I answered in the calmest voice I could muster. I filled his request for advice with bland, reasonable counsel that came off as generosity. It made him soft and trusting. Perfect. There was a moment, about 2 months in, when I almost faltered. I found myself seated across from Emily at our kitchen table, 2 cups of coffee between us. Her hands were smaller than I remembered. Her knuckles had calluses from typing. She looked like a woman I'd loved for a decade, and my chest ached with the memory of how good we'd been in the beginning. She smiled, tired and apologetic, and for a second I almost said everything. I almost unloaded the camera folder, the messages, the plans. I almost let the human thing, the devastation, the plead for truth, take over. But then I remembered how she'd touched my father, how she'd leaned into him in a way I'd never been leaned into again. I thought of the image of them, the casual betrayal, and I swallowed. "I'm here if you want to talk," I said instead, voice steady. "Whenever." She leaned back, relieved, and spoke about a deadline. I nodded. She left the room, and I watched her go. The moment tasted like ash. That night, I tightened the last of the nooses I'd prepared. I scheduled a small celebration, a dinner for our 10th anniversary, a party in name only. I invited people who mattered, a few neighbors who loved gossip, my employees who respected me, old friends who still remembered how we'd started. I let Emily think it would be a night of reconciliation. I let my father think it would be his chance to bask in family. They showed up, unguarded and radiant. What neither of them knew was that I had arranged two other things: a sealed envelope with a copy of every incriminating message and video, addressed to a lawyer I once consulted about business malpractice, and a set of printed emails and invoices that suggested Emily's freelance work had been funneled into accounts my father had access to. I did not fabricate evidence. I arranged facts so that when someone looked at them with intent, the truth would be impossible to ignore. The night of the anniversary, the house hummed with small talk. My father held court, and Emily laughed like she'd been born to it. I watched them from the corner of the room and felt something cold and unrelenting. The plan was in motion. The people I loved and loathed were moving toward the inevitable. When the first envelope arrived the next morning at the lawyer's office, it began a chain I did not need to pull manually. The law takes less kindly to betrayal when money and signatures are involved. Reputation corrodes even faster when someone else, a neutral third party, holds the proof. The rumor mill started the day after. The discreet calls, the puzzled faces, the way people tilted their heads when my father passed them on the street. They began to see him as a man who might have misstepped. They began to look at Emily with a new hardness. They did not suspect me. They were still wrapped in the illusion I'd helped them craft. And that gave me the most delicious advantage of all: time. I could see the fracturing begin, small fissures that made light leak in. Emily canceled a big client, citing personal reasons. My father stopped dropping by the Sunday dinners. He called less and took long drives. They tried to act normal. But normal is a costume that never quite fits once suspicion has entered the room. The trap for the physical part of my revenge was set, but I did not rush to spring it. In the next part, one would move from shadow to action. There are injuries that are emotional first and physical later. Wounds that open wider when you push with the right force. I had become patient to the point of cruelty. I had rehearsed my face, arranged the evidence, and watched the damage begin to take hold. Now, all that remained was to make them pay attention to the full cost. I had rehearsed the confrontation 1,000 times in the quiet rooms of my head. I imagined a dozen endings: the shout, the pleading, the legal knife that cleaves them from my life. None felt complete until I accepted that revenge needed a body as well as a ledger. It needed to be felt. I told them both that I wanted one last attempt at closure. A weekend away, the three of us, to talk, to clear the air. They accepted like criminals accepting a pardon, hungry for anything that would keep the status quo. My father came with his old charm tucked in his pocket. Emily packed a small bag and a practiced smile. They got into my truck at dawn, the way people get into a lifeboat when they don't know the sea is storming. We drove 2 hours to a cabin on the edge of nowhere, the kind of place with one road in and a rickety bridge to the only town. No signal. No neighbors close enough to hear the soft sound of a house at rest. I had told them I needed this distance to think, to show how committed I was to fixing things. It was a lie. Distance made them vulnerable. I left the cameras running in the corners where they wouldn't notice, and I let the house breathe around them while I climbed a ridge to watch. The sky was flat and iron. The world looked like a photograph that had been overexposed in grief. I sat there until the sun slid down and the windows of the cabin became yellow rectangles. At dusk, I walked back like a man who had found peace. I set a bottle of whiskey on the table and poured 3 glasses. We sat in a triangle of silence, the kind that is sticky with withheld things. I pushed my glass toward my father and watched his hand hover, like a bird uncertain on a wire. "This is stupid," he said finally, voice the one he used when he wanted to make light of anything serious. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill." Emily's face stiffened. "It's not a molehill, Dad. It, I said, cutting her off, calm enough to be dangerous, is everything. I laid the folder on the table. The sound it made was quiet but decisive, like a gavel. I watched as both of them leaned in. The expressions on their faces were interesting in that split second: greed, shame, then the thin, urgent calculation of people who know they've been found out. "You were careful," I said. "Very careful. But careful becomes brittle. People break when the pressure is right." Emily's first reaction was to reach the folder, but I stopped her with a movement, a measured, almost paternal motion. It was a rehearsal of the tenderness she had once mistaken for safety. She recoiled. I spoke without flourish. I read lines of messages out loud that had once been private and sacred to them, the little pornography of betrayal. Pet names, references to meetings, confessions that had lived in the margins of their lives. I watched as color drained from Emily's face, then flooded back in pale, ugly waves. My father's jaw tensed like a trap. "You ruined everything we built," I told them. "You dismantled it for a thrill, for a lie." My father tried to charm me. He offered an apology that had the texture of tablecloth fluff, warm enough to be practiced, insubstantial. I felt something in me click. The anger that had lived cold and measured for months boiled into something hard and fast. I stood then, slowly, as if the motion itself was a promise. "You think apologies fix things?" I asked. He shrugged. The same arrogant little lift he'd used to get out of mowing the lawn when I was a kid. "People make mistakes." "Not like this," I said. I could have left them there with the folder and the psych knife of revealed truth. I could have watched them disintegrate under the weight of exposure and walked away civilized and clean. But they had cost me the right to elegant cruelty. They had cheapened everything we'd had until I could no longer contain the animal in me that wanted to bite. I struck him the first time, not with a scream, not with wild fury, but with a controlled, precise blow that landed on his shoulder and knocked him into the chair. It was not enough to kill or maim. It was a message measured in bone. He blinked, stunned, more surprised by my willingness than by the pain. Emily screamed then, a short, sharp sound that split the air. What followed was a sequence I had choreographed in my head but had never made a reality. I bound my father's hands with rope, the same rope my grandfather used when fixing things. Not to torture, but to remove his agency. His hands, those hands that had once built boats in my memory, were useless now. He cursed me in a voice that tried to sound like a man in command, but his words were shards. I led him outside to the porch under the pretense of cooling off. The night air felt clean and indifferent. I did not hit him again. I did something worse. I made him watch as I walked back inside and closed the door that separated love from its ruin. I poured another glass of whiskey and sat at the table with Emily, the two of us as weathered and small as drowned things. "You will watch him lose everything," I said, voice low. "You will watch him be stripped of the things he used like armor, his reputation, his place at Sunday dinners, the look of respect he commands. You will feel it sink into you like a cold hand." She looked at me then, not with the old softness that once been around my flaws, but with a terror that I recognized as the beginning of real regret. Her lips trembled. "Please," she whispered, "this is too much." "It's not for you to decide," I replied. "You chose this." I spoke then of the other half of the revenge I had cultivated, the evidence that would not be stopped by a handkerchief apology, the copies of messages that had been mailed to the lawyer, the bank statements that would be audited, the emails forwarded to Emily's biggest clients. I watched the life drain from her face as the consequences I had set in motion unfolded like dominoes in her mind. "You will lose your work," I said. "You will lose your place in the neighborhood. People will look at you the way I look at you now, as someone who took something sacred and threw it away." She sobbed, a sound that was ugly and guttural and full of real fear. I let her. I leaned forward and let the silence fold between us like a palm. When we finally opened the door to check on my father, he had tried to stand and failed. His face was raw with humiliation. He was not a villain in the cartoon sense. He was a small, pathetic man who had misused his power. The sight of him, slick with the vulnerability of age, felt like the culmination of everything I had been building toward. I untied him and forced him to drive me back into town in his car, his hands trembling on the wheel. We spoke very little. He apologized in between sentences and offered explanations. Loneliness, confusion, an empty house. The words meant nothing and everything at once. I would not be placated. Over the next weeks, the world I'd rearranged took its toll. The lawyer made the calls. Emily's major client canceled their contract with her. Within days, after a terse email from someone at our firm hinted at conflict of interest, my father's name stopped appearing at the charity luncheons he'd once chaired. My employees turned the corner polite to cold. Whispers filled the warehouse like dust. There were physical consequences, too. My father's health, the small, vulnerable things you pretend won't change, started to unravel. He developed a limp that made him move like a man who had been humiliated as much as hurt. I don't deny that part of my revenge at a cost I didn't anticipate. The sight of a man withered not only by his mistakes but by my hands. I had wanted him to feel what I felt, the hollowness, the sharpness of betrayal, and he did. He paid, in the body and in the place he once occupied in the town's social crown. Emily packed a bag and left. She did not come back for the things a marriage had acquired. The photographs, the small mementos, the plant I had accidentally killed the first month we moved in. She left like a woman who had no home to return to. I watched the door close and felt the strange, awful freedom of a man who had just executed a sentence he could not undo. The revenge did not make me whole. There are things a ledger never balances. In the weeks after, I woke at night and thought about the boy who had married the bright-eyed girl in college, the man who believed love was supposed to protect him. That man was gone. In his place was someone with quieter face, someone who could plan and execute, gather evidence, and break bones with his fists when words failed. I am not proud of all of it. There is a weight that comes with being both judge and executioner. But there is also a clarity. They cannot unmake what they did. They cannot put the decade back into the hollow it was pulled from. They will live with the stain and its consequences. They will wake in the night and count what was lost. When the dust settled, the neighborhood resumed its rhythms. People repaired fences, returned calls, filed taxes, and moved through ordinary days. My father's chair at the community hall remained empty for a long time. Emily's name became something people glanced at with curiosity and quickly looked away from as if they had swallowed a bug. I kept the cameras for a while longer, not because I expected more treachery, but because I wanted a record that I had been right. It sat in a folder on external drive, a hard, cold archive of what love and betrayal can look like up close. Sometimes, late at night, I pull it up and watch the three figures in the cabin move like ghosts. The way she laughed at a joke that was never hers, the way my father smelled of someone else's cologne, the way I sat at the table and poured whiskey for a family that had ceased to exist. The revenge changed all of us. Perhaps that was the point. Perhaps vengeance is not a cure but a mirror. It shows you what you become to make the other pay. I paid, too. Not only with the small joys they stole, but with the softer parts of myself I used up in the process. Empathy, naive trust, the ease with which I once slept next to another. In the end, I learned that some betrayals cannot be fixed by words, nor by calm conversations. Some require the hard, ugly work of tearing and exposing, of forcing accountability in ways that leave scars. I did that work. And when it was done, I was left with quiet and the knowledge that they would carry what I had given them for the rest of their lives.